For decades, millions have asked, did we really land on the moon? Or was it a perfectly staged show? Stay tuned, because the conspiracy theories behind this mystery are wilder than you think. The footage of the American flag on the lunar surface looks to some viewers like a flag fluttering in the wind, and that single image became a symbol for doubt. Critics say a flag cannot wave without atmosphere, so the scene must have been staged. The physical explanation is straightforward and supported by engineers who worked on Apollo. NASA designed the flag with a horizontal rod to keep it extended so cameras could see it, and the fabric was tightly packed before deployment. When astronauts planted the pole, they had to force it into compacted lunar soil, twisting and wobbling the pole. Those motions and the pre-existing creases in the cloth produced ripples that remained visible after movement stopped because there is no air to smooth them out. Engineers and photographers have reproduced the same effect in vacuum tests and in controlled demonstrations on Earth. Showing the result requires no studio wind machines. Many people stare at Apollo photos and notice a black sky with no visible stars, and that absence feeds a simple disbelief. This is not a missing detail, but a property of photography under extreme contrast conditions. Apollo cameras were set for daylight exposure to capture the bright lunar surface and the reflective astronaut suits using medium format Hasselblad bodies and film magazines. Under those exposure settings, faint stars are too dim to register on film, just like stars are invisible in daytime photos taken on Earth. Astronauts did take starfield photographs and long exposures when the situation allowed, but those images were taken with different camera settings and without a sunlit foreground. Odd shadow directions and seemingly lit objects in shade are favorite examples used to argue for multiple studio lights. Those observations overlook the terrain and reflective behavior of lunar dust. Perspective plays a role. Parallel rays can produce shadows that appear non-parallel in a two-dimensional photo unless you reconstruct the three-dimensional layout. Sunlight reflecting off bright regolith and even off the astronauts' suits scatters light into shadows and softens contrasts. Physics explains these patterns without invoking artificial lighting. Photographic analysis teams and hobbyists have recreated comparable lighting and shadow patterns using real rocks and reflective powder in outdoor settings to show how the effect emerges naturally. Some skeptics pointed out that a strong descent rocket should have left a prominent crater under the lunar module, and when they saw a modest surface disturbance, they suspected fakery. The lunar module used a throttleable descent engine, and during final approach the thrust was low and spread out, pushing dust sideways rather than excavating a deep pit. Lunar dust lies as a thin powder over compactor layers, so engine exhaust tends to remove loose grains, but not gouge deep craters. Telemetry from the mission, crew commentary, and photographic evidence all match the expected effects of a low-thrust touchdown and do not support a staged collapse. Mission telemetry logged engine throttle positions and fuel usage during descent. And these data align with the final image evidence of light scuffing rather than deep excavation. The Van Allen belts are real zones of trapped, charged particles around Earth, and early hoax claims said passing them would be instantly lethal. Mission designers understood the hazard and planned trajectories to cross weaker regions and reduce transit time through intense zones. The spacecraft provided shielding in key areas, and crew members wore dosimeters to measure accumulated radiation. Recorded dosimeter results and post-flight medical examinations showed exposure levels that were measurable but well below thresholds for immediate harm. And no astronaut showed acute radiation sickness after missions. Post-flight medical records and long-term health monitoring showed no acute radiation injuries among Apollo crew, and specialists who reviewed the exposure data concluded that while radiation was a real hazard, it did not prevent missions from proceeding safely under the protocols used. The idea that NASA staged the landings in a soundstage is dramatic, but practically impossible once you consider scale and detection. At its peak, The Apollo program included hundreds of thousands of people working across many contractors and government facilities, manufacturing rockets, testing hardware, and training crews. Launch operations were public, and rocket construction involved visible supply chains and launches that would be nearly impossible to hide. Independent observatories, foreign space agencies, and amateur radio operators tracked mission signals and telemetry, and the Soviet Union maintained monitoring that would have exposed any obvious hoax. Maintaining silence across so many countries and independent networks for decades strains credulity far beyond the simpler explanation that missions were real. Soviet space officials and other international observers tracked Apollo telemetry and published independent confirmations at the time, which would have been counter-evidence to any secret manufacturing of footage. The global and distributed nature of tracking and telemetry makes a complete, long-term cover-up practically impossible without detection. The Stanley Kubrick myth persists because his film work made space look convincingly cinematic, and people prefer tidy explanations. Rumors connected Kubrick to Apollo mainly because of visual similarity and the director's fame, but investigators traced these claims to hoaxed paperwork and edited videos rather than credible testimony. Kubrick's family and collaborators denied involvement, and no reliable documentary evidence links him to a staged landing. The rumor also benefited from media attention in the 1,990 seconds and 2,000 seconds that recycled the idea with little vetting, turning a small fringe theory into a more visible cultural meme. Debunking groups and journalists have documented the hoaxes tied to the claim and shown how simple errors or deliberate fabrications turned into widely shared myths. Apollo crews returned about 842 pounds of lunar samples, collected from multiple landing sites, and those materials are among the most convincing physical evidence. Geologists examined the samples and found mineral textures and isotopic ratios consistent with formation in vacuum and under low gravity, including tiny glass spherules created by micrometeorite impacts. Multiple independent laboratories analyzed the material and published consistent results over decades, and NASA distributed small samples to foreign institutions that confirmed lunar-specific attributes. Scientists measured rock ages using radiometric dating techniques and found ages consistent with an airless environment exposed to impacts for billions of years. These dating results and mineral analyses are published in peer-reviewed journals and form a public, verifiable scientific record. Manufacturing or faking such a volume of consistent samples across many labs would be effectively impossible. Beyond photographs and testimony, the missions left hardware and experiments that people can verify today. Orbital images show descent stages, rover wheel tracks, and the faint paths where astronauts walked. These features match Apollo mission logs and coordinates. Retroreflector arrays placed by Apollo crews still return laser pulses sent from Earth observatories, giving precise returns that confirm equipment was placed at the recorded spots. Those retroreflectors enable repeatable, independent experiments that provide centimeter-level distance measurements between Earth and Moon and are used by multiple research groups worldwide. Coordinates from mission logs, seismometer placements, and experiment footprints all match the imagery from orbiters and laser ranging work, creating a consistent map of human activity on the lunar surface. Independent, amateur, and institutional teams have replicated laser ranging and imaging work, adding to a body of confirmable public evidence. Finally, why do these theories persist, despite strong converging evidence? Distrust in institutions rose sharply in the late 20th century, and sensational books, television specials, and later internet videos amplified fringe claims that first found audiences in earlier decades. Promoters and provocateurs found eager listeners, and social platforms now allow fringe ideas to spread rapidly without careful fact-checking. Conspiracy content often rewards engagement and sharing, which helps theories live on even when the physical evidence is repeated and verifiable. Surveys over time show a small but persistent minority who question the landings. Numbers vary by poll, but many studies find single-digit to low double-digit percentages in different groups and regions. If you want a simple answer, the claims survive because they are emotionally powerful, easy to repeat, and tap into pre-existing distrust. The science, the hardware, and the repeated tests point to human exploration, not a staged picture. So, was the moon landing really faked? Science says no, but the theories aren't going away anytime soon. What do you think? Clever government hoax, or one giant leap for mankind? Drop your thoughts below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more mind-bending stories.